see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And today I'm here with, I hope I pronounced the name right, Govert van Ginkel.
Pretty good, yeah.
Do you want to just repeat it, just so that it's accurate?
So my name is Govert van Ginkel. It's very guttural, but that would be Dutch.
Oh, okay.
And, anytime you say Govert or any version of that, that's fine with me.
Well, you have a real American accent, actually. So
I spent a long time in North America, and obviously my present partner is Canadian. So we spent a lot of time in Canada.
Okay. Well, great. Well, let me give a little introduction to you so we know you're from the Netherlands. And you're also a speaker, a trainer, a coach, facilitator, and mediator. And you've been trained in a lot of different processes. I know compassionate communication, neuro-linguistic programming I saw on your website, restorative circles, mediation processes, and maybe you can just give a little bit more background about yourself.
Yes, my education goes back to after general education, studying law. So I went to university, got a law degree, and then for some 13 years I practiced labor law. And so that was always about labor conflicts mostly. And I got to see what happens in the field, how law tries to solve it. And I got frustrated with that. After 13 years, more and more, I felt dissatisfied with the effects of that. It seemed like we had found a way of making decisions probably in difficult situations, but nobody seemed to be satisfied. Even when we took cases to court, the judge didn't seem to be satisfied. We didn't get, as a party, we didn't get everything that we wanted, neither did the other party. And so everybody went home slightly frustrated, at least. And then later, when I became head of an industrial tribunal, and I was presiding myself, I found the same thing with people that offered their cases to me for judgment. Same thing happened. I had the law to go by, so I did the thing that was fair by law, but parties were not satisfied. And I thought, well, what is justice if nobody's happy? It seems so strange. And this is, as a society, this is the best thing that we thought of. And so in 2001, I got out of that, and I started to look for different ways, because it became clear to me that it is how we relate as people to each other. And that looking at the whole paradigm of conflicts, if we always see conflict as a threat, obviously we already have an enemy image. And that sets up the whole conversation that follows after that. And so seeing conflict in a different light, as something that requires, or in a changed condition, a changed circumstance, requires a new decision, all of a sudden it is not so threatening. The reality is the situation already changed, and now we have something to discuss. And we're trying to make ends meet, both of us. We are both on the same side. We're not on opposite sides.
Well, by way of introduction and being on opposite sides, I'm on your Facebook page right now, and there's a photograph of a bridge. So what is the significance of that bridge?
The bridge is, yeah, one of the, actually in North America, the company that I've created, I call Bridging Spaces, and this is what I'm wanting to do, is bridge a space between people. There's this gap that keeps us apart. And so the bridge is like, how do we make that bridge? The bridge of understanding, the bridge of empathy. How do we connect with each other? And how do we connect in a way that's more enjoyable, solves more, helps us live together and work together in a way that's enjoyable and fruitful for everyone?
Okay, and I also showed your website, which is cvcn.nl.
That's one of the websites. Another website that I created was Govert van Ginkel.nl, and they have a slightly different approach. But CVCN.nl is the Center for Compassionate Communication. That's what you would say in English.
Oh, okay. Well, I have links, at the bottom of this video to all of your different links, so anybody can kind of follow to that. So what we really wanted to kind of focus on in this dialogue is you'd written a really, I felt, a very nice article. It was called "Practical Empathy as it Applies to Survivors of Sexual Assault." And
Yes.
I think in this dialogue, we kind of wanted to go kind of step by step through that, because I thought you'd really laid out a lot of really interesting and very accessible, very readable points about what is empathy and how do you do empathy. So does that sound okay to you to just maybe go through that? Are we ready for that stage?
Yeah.
So do you want to just introduce the article and just how it came about, and maybe start going through it, and I'll kind of step in and kind of ask questions as we go along.
Yes, I think a little bit of background might help. The topic sexual assault actually came to me because it came into my life. I had a personal experience with someone who was in that situation, and seeing what happens to someone who has been in a situation where they were attacked, violently attacked, and where sexuality played a role, and what happens after that. I saw that I didn't know a lot about that situation, and being in this field of empathic connection, I really had to use all my resources to deal with this. And so basically, and it was my partner who had this experience. She was here in Canada. I just flown back to Holland, and in broad daylight, a man entered her house and attacked her, threatened to kill her, and was about to sexually molest her. Now, the way that she dealt with that situation was remarkable. And so the sexual part actually didn't happen. She was hurt, she was cut with a knife, but the way that she approached the man, actually by, among other things, asking him about his needs, and at the same time calling out for help, is what finally got him on the run. He never met somebody who was interested in his needs, and B, he probably considered that it was taking too much time, and actually he said, "Oh, I guess I don't want to kill you," because of her approach. Now, when the police came, obviously, and the ambulance, because she was hurt, they said, you just did everything right. And so that was the starting point. And she called me in Holland. I received a call. I was very concerned what was going on. I couldn't obviously be there. We were continents away. And so from a distance, I heard what happened after that. And this is also where I start to note, like, oh boy, we have police, we have medical services, victims assistance, and yet it all tends to fall short of what is needed here. Police basically are there to catch a criminal. They're not there for the victim. For the victim, the medical services are present. And then victim support is something that, as a victim, you can ask for. But in a state where you've just been attacked, and emotionally you're kind of lost and overwhelmed by what happened, the pressure of all these services is overwhelming. And so what I found was that although I understand that police will ask for evidence and that it's their task to pursue, it's not in the best interest of the person that was attacked. I mean, if I've just been attacked and then I get a third degree because instead of victim, I've also become the witness, then that creates a whole different dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Are you saying it's like for you that you're saying that there's a need for empathy through the whole process because the act itself is starting as a lack of empathy for the persons who's the perpetrator is starting off by violating the empathic connection. They're not hearing the person, they're not seeing the pain, the fright. So there's already a beginning of a lack of empathy. The person that's the victim is like totally, you're kind of in shock and you're mistrustful. And I mean, I've been in difficult situations where it's, you just feel the anxieties kind of going through my whole body. So I can imagine, that there's just all that anxiety happening. And then it's all the interactions that the victim or survivor is kind of going through, and how does empathy apply to all those different stages?
Exactly. And what's everybody who's been trained to professionally deal with this situation has been trained mainly in taking care of their objective. So police will take care of evidence and pursuing the offender. Medical services will look for wounds and target healing. But who is there to take care of you emotionally? I mean, your physical wounds may not be the worst. I mean, the emotional wound that's there is probably worse. And who's taking care of that? And in a situation where you totally feel out of control and lost all control, basically, you need somebody there to support you. Somebody who connects with you in a way that creates trust, because you've lost all trust. You lost trust in any person, really, because this happened, and it happened out of the blue. Maybe it was somebody you actually knew, somebody you trusted. So if this can happen, who else could you trust? Or maybe you cannot no longer trust anybody. So empathy is really important to establish a basis of, okay, I'm here to help you, I'm here to hear you, and I'm here to be with you. And whatever you need, I'll try and provide and take care of.
Well, in the article, you say empathy serves a number of purposes: the recovery of the victim, the gathering of information, evidence, trust in the judicial system, and a positive end to traumatic event.
Right. Yes. And so through this personal experience that I had of that, I started to consider and read more about what are we doing here on this topic? How are we taking care of this? So I informed myself about what things are like and what, in my views, would be necessary to make a difference. And so over the years, like the last decades, what we've done is that we've created protocols worldwide. Most Western countries, you'll find that there are protocols now for police services and medical services in how to act. But what I also found through my studies of nonviolent communication, working in this field, is that doesn't necessarily teach you empathy. Empathy is a state of being with somebody. And so it requires space, and it requires a lot of listening. And it requires that you have the time to be there. Now, a lot of these services are really constricted in time per person, if you like. We have a job to do. We need to do it as fast as we can. We're on taxpayers' money. So let's get the move on and deal with it. That may not be what the person that was in that experience requires. Now, and then on top of that, I think a lot of people, although what I found was that I talked to detectives that work in the sex crime squads, and they have a better understanding of what happens to people that have been sexually assaulted than I would say other people working in different fields, in policing I'm not sure about medical care, but I know they get to see a lot just straight after the incident. They're usually the first on the scene. And they tend to be very understanding, I found, of what it is. But to put yourself in the place of the person that experienced this is a whole different thing. And what I wrote to you, there's a sensitivity around the terms sexual assault, victim, survivor even, because, and look at the term victim, it puts you in a place of disempowerment. Once I am a victim, not only may I see myself as a victim, but other people start to see me as a victim and treat me like a victim. And so a victim tends to be powerless. Now, the situation already created a huge feeling of powerless, loss of control, loss of power. So what I really want is, as a person who experiences, is to get on with my life and be in control again. But if I get this label of being victimized, or a survivor, then I start to carry that with me. And it becomes an extra burden. And I think it actually may prevent the healing that is required in that situation.
Well, I feel have some difficulty with those terms as well, and I don't know what term to use. It's almost like we need to have a term of the empathized or something, or I mean, it's like a new. How do we kind of? What do we have? What kind of a word is a good word for someone that's been attacked like that?
Well, the thing is, and I talked to at the conference at the time in 2009. Do you know what a Jane Doe is?
Yeah, it's the equivalent of a John Doe, a person that's. I guess they don't have a name for the person. A dead person is a John Doe sometimes, or.
Yeah. So what women who've been attacked and who wrote books about it came out and called themselves Jane Doe because they wanted to not give their names because they knew and had experienced how people would then look at them from then on as being a victim of something. But they thought it was very important to speak about the experience so that other people would start to understand, because they too had noticed how they were being victimized again by the whole system, and which is called secondary victimization. First there is the attack, and then you get everybody else's response to what happened. Mm-hmm. And so they wrote books about it. Now at the conference I met with the Canadian Jane Doe, and she actually said, why would you call it anything? Why wouldn't you just stick to the facts? And what we do in NVC is we name an observation. So we would say, well, when this person entered your house, had a knife, put that through your throat, and said so and so to you. And that's a factual description. She said that's better than anything else. Just stick it to the facts. Because any label tends to get a life of its own.
Would it be like saying the person that was raped or the person that was attacked?
I would say attack would be more a proper word. I'm also lost. I've been trying to rack my brain about finding a better term. But I would stick with attack, because sexual assault, as the term, it seems to apply that there is an important sexual part to that. Whereas the attack is not about sex, but it's more about control, and there's violence involved, and it's aimed at denigrating the person through the use of sex. It aims at denigrating a person at their deepest level of intimacy. And so sex is only a way to achieve that, but it's not the aim at all. So there's a lot of confusion. And what I found is there are a lot of judgments people have about sexual assault, because they seem to think that because you dress a certain way, you might have invited it. That's a classic. And so there's a lot of things there, and they are confused about the intent of the person that did this.
Yeah, well, for me, it's really rotates around empathy, because I'm looking at how do we create a culture of empathy, and that would be that the person who was attacked, that the person that attacking didn't have empathy. They didn't see who that person was. They didn't feel. They didn't stand in that person's shoes. They didn't feel their common humanity. So there's some kind of a break in the connection and in the common humanity that happens at that point.
Yes, and it's hard to what I would say, like, we can train professionals. We can give them the experience of what that's like. But what I've also noticed is that we need to look at the whole system, not just the symptom in that specific situation, but look at the whole system and look at our society, in which connection more and more seems to be lost. We have more means of connecting through internet, through wireless, and yet the quality of connection seems to be more and more one-sided. And we can delete responses, we can shut it off. We don't actually have to face the other person and see what it does with the other person when we say something. We can just turn off the screen, close the computer, and have nothing to do with it. And so I think in a way we are more and more maybe numbing out on one side, but also losing skill. We're having less and less the experience of empathic connection. And I think that once people experience what that's like, they'll have a different view on that. They'll see how rich that is. And I think there's, maybe in our busy lives, there is a growing need for empathic connection, and yet we're not aware that that's that. And so we try and supplement in some way that need by other means, by creating more self-time, by just doing something for me. But in a way that doesn't necessarily meet that need for connection. And that's just because we don't know where else to turn.
Mm-hmm.
How's that sound to you?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm, spending the rest of my life on building a culture of empathy, because I see that need as a basic biological built-in quality that just from a biological, neurological standpoint, that we're just wired for that. And that when we don't have that sense of connection, our body is telling us you're lonely, you're stressed, and it's kind of like a reminder saying find some way of finding connection, because from our whole biology of that we're social beings, and we exactly. Need that. So the question is it's how do we create more empathy and connection? And what I liked in your article was you'd actually gone into, like everybody asked, like, well, what is empathy? So you'd kind of gone through and it had really brought in a lot of different definitions, and perhaps we could go through some of those. You started off with Dan Batson and then Carl Rogers. Do you want to maybe talk about that?
See, yes. I'm just trying to find Dan Batson. I'm not sure.
Oh, it's at the very top. Just a quick. You just say it's what is empathy, and then you mention Daniel Batson as a motivation oriented towards the other.
Yes.
Okay. And then you go into Carl Rogers, and then you go into extended. Yes.
And it's through Marshall Rosenberg that I heard about Carl Rogers, and Carl Rogers spent a whole career in trying to understand. He was a professor in psychology, and how do people connect, or how do they become disconnected, and what does it mean to be a human being? So he wrote a book on becoming a person, and I think what meant most to me in that book was that he says, we tend to do our education telling people what they need to be. But what if to be a person basically needs turning inside to find out about yourself? And he found that looking for the feelings and what they were telling you about yourself, and Marshall Rosenberg would identify that as needs. What are my feelings telling me about my needs? And so who am I as a person? That's the primary way to become an authentic person. And to me, it seems like it requires this path and becoming an authentic person that helps me to connect with other people in an empathic, in a compassionate way. And if I don't, I'm always sort of trying to imagine what other people are going through, but then filtered through all these concepts that I have. Now, going back to what empathy then is, Carl Rutsch said, it is about perceiving the internal frame of reference of an other with accuracy and with the emotional components and meanings. And so it's getting in touch with what's going on in the other person, but he also says it's also about as if I would be experiencing it without actually experiencing it. So that's to me, it's a very important distinction. And there's this distinction between empathy and sympathy. And so whenever I empathize with somebody, I have an understanding, I have an imagination of what this other person is going through, and I can base that also because of my own feelings. I do need my feelings and my own needs to be able to imagine that. But when I sympathize with somebody, I actually feel what I would feel in that situation. And that's to me where the focus shifts from the other person to myself. Now I'm experiencing all these feelings in me, and I could be just as sad as the other person, but actually the other person has lost me in that moment. Mm-hmm. I'm totally focused on me. So imagining what it's like to be in someone else's shoes is another way to put it. Mm-hmm. And that's an easy one, I mean, to remember for me.
Yeah, so it's kind of the reflecting of the other, perhaps is one way to put it. But then you are aware that it's not you, that you have your own being, and that you're kind of just creating space for that person to be seen inside yourself, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just getting back to Daniel Batson real quick. Actually, he has an article on where he kind of looked at all the definitions of empathy. And I did interview him. He had like 8 different ways that the word empathy is used, because there seems to be, it's used quite differently by, even the academics. And so I actually did like an hour-long interview with him where we went step by step through each of his 8 ways. So that was just an aside. And then, so the Carl Rogers, I love his work. And I mean, he's a real pioneer in this whole area of empathy and the importance of just doing empathic listening and not bringing yourself into it, not trying to, tell people what they should think or be or something else, or, sympathize with them, but just let them be and then just feel where it is that they are.
Exactly. And what helped me is like the way Marshall Rosenberg, he took all the elements of that experience, that empathic experience, and then there's this whole list actually of things that help me to know what empathy is and what it isn't. And so, like you said, any form of judgment, because any form of judgment not only will keep me from understanding the other person because I go into right or wrong, but it's also that I've lost my thought, my train of thought now.
Yeah, you're kind of going, before we get into Marshall, because you have a whole bunch of different summations after Marshall, maybe we can go into Simon Baron-Cohen. That was the next on your list, and just and he's a professor of developmental psychology at Cambridge. And actually, he just came out with a book. He has a recent book, The Science of Evil. And there's an interview too that I did with him. It's like an hour interview. No, it's a text interview.
Right.
But yeah. So what did you learn from him, from his definition?
Well, when he came with a definition, he said empathy is about spontaneously and naturally tuning into the other person's thoughts and feelings. Now, the element spontaneously is important to me here in his definition. It's not something, it's like, to me, it's not a doing, but it's like I turn to the other person because there's something in me that feels drawn and then is with the other person. So I'm not creating it necessarily, but I have this inner drive. There's some need of me met by just being with that person, and then I am there. It's spontaneous. Now, in the beginning, when I'm first learning about empathy, I might be trying this and making it a doing, which is not bad. I mean, how else would I learn? But when I'm doing this, it might not necessarily be empathy. It's my attempts at empathy. But later, what I started to understand is that it's a change of consciousness. This spontaneousness means that I no longer have this enemy image. When I look at another person, I understand that something really happened to them where their needs are no longer met. And I'm seeing that they're wanting something good, something positive. I'm not seeing anything bad. I mean, the experience might be very intense. The experience might be frightening, but they're aiming for something good. And so I can spontaneously turn to someone because I no longer feel threatened myself. I think that's an important distinction. But that only happens when I lose this enemy image that I might have before. And then if I have an enemy image, then it becomes a doing. I turn to this person. I think that listening is the best choice, but at the same time, there's a different dialogue going on in the back of my mind, which means that I'm not for 100% with this other person. And that's not empathy.
Yeah, it's maybe judgments and all the other things that keep you from kind of being present with them. If I'm, you kind of mentioned that in the next stage here, but what was coming to me is that maybe I could just. I mean, I've been really interested in this whole part of definitions because there's a lot of different definitions people have,
Right.
like Dan Batson mentions. So I've put together kind of a working definition for myself, which perhaps I could just share quickly as kind of like a framework. Is the first part of empathy for me is self-empathy. So that's a sensory awareness of what's going on inside myself so that I can actually read my own feelings and be aware and be able to, maybe articulate or express those feelings. And, if I'm afraid, my awareness is I can feel that. I can maybe feel a constriction or, openness. And as we are more open, we allow for mirrored empathy to happen. So that's through mirror neurons. So as you're shaking your head, I can see a little bit of bobbing of your head. I can feel what that's like inside myself through mirror neurons. And I can get a feeling of where you are emotionally, energetically. So that would be kind of the mirrored empathy. The third part would be imaginative empathy, or the academics sometimes call it cognitive empathy or perspective taking, which is that I can kind of put myself in your situation and see the world kind of from your point of view. And that's knowing that I'm a separate being, you're a separate being, and that you have a different history from me. And I can kind of imagine what you've kind of gone through from your history and background. And then the fourth part is empathic action, which is as we kind of connect, through that mirroring and perspective taking, we start kind of becoming almost like see our common humanity. We kind of become almost like see our sameness or our shared sense of being. And then it's like we're almost wired to naturally want to contribute to the well-being of others. And then, you see that in I've seen it especially in mediation, right? Where two disputants, they're all mad at each other, they're not talking, they're judging each other. You empathize with both sides, you kind of calm them down, you kind of model the empathy, then you turn them to each other and they start, talking, they slowly start empathizing, you kind of contribute, help create that environment. They finally then kind of connect and start seeing the world through each other's eyes and see how the other felt. And then the last part is, well, what do we do now? And then they kind of do an action, like a set of steps or something that they're going to do in the future together. And it's kind of like this negotiation, it's like, oh, I see how you feel about that. What about we try this? And so forth. So that's kind of like the basic framework that I've been kind of plugging all these different, definitions into. So I'm just wondering how that kind of resonates with your understanding.
Well, first, I'm not sure the word, but first, what appeared to me is like when you said this felt sense. To me, and I think this is the marker. No matter what definition we use, like to me, the felt sense is I either feel I open up, or I shut down. And whoever, it doesn't matter which country I am, whoever I talk to, they all have the same experience. They might call it a little bit different, but the empathic connection means I seem to open up without any concern about my safety. I feel like I'm safe, warm, and welcome. But whenever there is something else, it seems like the doors start to close, and a wall would rise, some would say. And the more threatened I feel, the more I feel this constriction. And so I would say, well, to me, the felt sense is really like a marker where I know that either empathy happened or it didn't. Mm-hmm. Now, the whole sequence that you mentioned, it reminded me a lot of what I see in restorative circles. People enter in a circle process, start to express what they're going through, not necessarily in feelings and needs, but how they experience it, and the words they're used to. And the facilitator is only there to create clarity whenever people haven't really understood each other, because there's this process where one says something and the other repeats what they heard. And so we only continue when that process led to, okay, yes, I really got it. And so out of that, the most interesting thing to me is always that whenever people get each other, it seems like new possibilities arise, new options open. Something that seemed impossible before, all of a sudden is possible, and people are very much willing to help each other. It's like from where they were in conflict before, now they're buddies, and we're going to solve this together. Does that sound like what you?
Absolutely, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, it just happens over and over and over again, and it's as if it's biologically wired to do that. You know what I mean? It's
exactly.
Like once we connect and once we see the humanity of another person, it's like we can almost not help but contribute to their well-being, because it's almost as if they are us, and it's almost like a we. So we're contributing to our common we-ness or something.
Exactly. Yes. So to me, it seems like you said before, it's not something we necessarily need to learn, but maybe we need to remember. And maybe we need to look at all the filters, all the concepts about guilt and shame and blame that prevent us from connecting in a way that opens us up to our humanity, where we connect fully and have an understanding of each other.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting you started talking about the feeling of it, because I started to call this the wheel and feel of empathy. The wheel is kind of that cognitive, the model. And then the feel of it is just, what does it feel like? To be grounded in the feeling is, I think, so important. Because when I've asked people, like, why did you start getting into the work of empathy? And they say, once I just somebody listened to me like I'd never been heard before, and it felt so good. It's like I just wanted to do it,
Yes,
spend my life getting to this point.
exactly. Yeah. So when we first have this feeling, it's so attractive that not only do we want more of it ourselves, we're really wanting to share this. And to me, it seems like I've looked at everything. Here in Canada, I work with the John Howard Society. It's people that have been in prison for some reason, and they come out, and we work on what happened in their lives, and it's very fruitful work. And yet, why not start earlier? Why not start before the problem arose? Why not start in schools? Why not connect and help children just to connect with each other in a different way, and to offer them ways of solving conflict in a different way? And I've seen examples from restorative justice where schools were so open to us visiting as strangers, if you like. But I've seen in England, in Hull, I've seen kids in a school, 7-year-old, one kid pushed another kid for some reason. 4 kids just sat down on the ground immediately, and within 5 minutes they solved their difference. And the teacher was just standing by in case, but not really needed. I mean, just imagine that, 7-year-old, and you solve your own conflict.
Wow.
How does that positively influence your life? And I've heard, in Holland, I've been to a school where I've spoken to the children or teenagers between 15 and 20, and they wouldn't want a different school. This is the place where they want to go to school. And they go to school because they're having fun. And the relationship with the teachers is different. They have positive interactions with parents, teachers, and the pupils. Everybody's happy with this approach.
Yeah, so it's like having a curriculum, an empathy curriculum from the earliest age through all the grades. I think would really kind of transform our whole culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not about avoiding conflict. Conflict is part of life. Conflict only means that the situation changed and a new solution is required. It requires that we talk. So looking at that paradigm differently, it offers a different approach. And like, I'm not scared to go to you and talk to you because there's a conflict. I'm going to you, I want to speak to you because we have something that we can do together, and we can make things even better than they were before when we do that. It feels more inviting. It feels like, okay, the situation changed, we need to do something.
Well, in your article, you'd said if we sum it up, we see that empathy requires, and then you'd gone through, I think, like 7 or so steps. I'm just thinking of how to kind of move forward. Could we go through each of those steps with that?
Yes, we could. And basically, I'm just saying, if you're looking, are you looking at page 2 of that article?
Yeah, being totally present.
Yes, being totally present is one of the things. So, and it's, I'm just quoting Marshall Rosenberg, really. I mean, I really want him to have the reward for like getting that clarity out there, because it helped me enormously. But it is like what I said also before, it's like being totally present means I have no agenda in the back of my mind. I'm not, at the same time that you are talking, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say next. I'm totally with you. I'm experiencing what you're saying. I'm imagining what you're feeling and what you're needing. And at some time, I may say something like, well, that must be terrifying for you, or that must have made you feel happy. But I would connect with you. It would be more like I acknowledge, validate where you are than anything else. I'm not trying to give an answer or solve anything. So that also means that the second step, which means I'm mostly silent. I'm being present, mostly silent. And I'm really listening to you. It's like so interesting what you're saying. I'm totally with you. And to to be with you, to be totally present means also being authentic. That's the third step. And to me, that is about giving up any notion of what I should be. So if, especially in the situation of like any trauma, like sexual assault, it means I put away either my nurse's function or my policeman's function or whatever it is, but I'm with you as a human being. I'm just being me. There is no badge, there's no nothing that makes any distinction between you and me. I'm another person being with you. And that's very important, because as soon as there is any difference between the listener and the speaker, there's like a hierarchy. So there's an authority there. And whenever I talk to any kind of authority, I tend to phrase things differently. I tend to not be so authentic myself. I'm scared of authority. I might withhold or not express myself fully. It's an obstacle. So it's very important to be aware of that and remove those obstacles of really making that connection. And the fourth step is about being conscious of my own feelings. Because just because I'm so absorbed by what you're saying doesn't mean that I'm no longer conscious of myself. It's just the focus is on you. But there may be a point, maybe when I get tired, that all of a sudden I notice I find it harder to listen. And when I don't pay attention and don't take care of myself, I might feel some resentment and I want to stop. And so I might come back to you at some point and saying, to wrap this up, what would you say? Or can you just conclude this in one point? And so it's a disconnect that's created in that moment. There's no longer any empathy. It would be more empathic to say, I notice that I'm getting tired here. And I find it harder to listen. And I really want to listen. I really want to be totally present. How would it be for you if we would reschedule and take this up again in an hour?
So you're holding both the other person and yourself. So it's like kind of your awareness has to be big enough to hold both of those kind of at the same time.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And this is something that, especially in the situations of trauma, is very important to remember. Because when I enter a situation in which somebody has been traumatized, they are not able to hold themselves most of the time. And so it requires more of my awareness. And before I step in, can I take care of this? And how far can I take care of this? Can I be present with this person? Because if I assume responsibility for this situation, other people may assume that it's been taken care of. So I've become the anchor for this person, but if I'm not willing to hold that anchor for this person for the time that it takes, then this person might be lost.
Because they're probably feeling very shut down and closed. The person who's been the victim or attacked or what have you, that they would be feeling closed. So you would need to be holding kind of your awareness and their awareness is being closed. It's like, oh, I feel you're feeling, maybe not even saying it, but just saying, oh, I feel the closedness of, and the shut, or the stress, or
maybe just being with them in silence.
Yeah, that's what I meant, doing it silently. Yeah.
Yeah, just physical presence may be all that's required. A steady physical presence. But it's like I need to make sure that I'm not overtired. I need to make sure that I'm clear, that I'm authentic, and that I connect in a way, and that if I can no longer hold this energy, if you like, then that I also take responsibility for follow-up in a way that this person is supported. You see, but in the dance of empathy and self-empathy, it's very important to stay clear of where I am and where the other person is. And so to understand their needs and understand that they not necessarily may be able to define their needs that I see at that time.
Mm-hmm. And it's sharing your own, like, oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now, and to kind of be able to bring that up
Yes,
too.
and without elaborating the point,
Mm-hmm.
but because that would putting my stuff like these people cannot hold anything but themselves in that given moment. So it's important for me to just state that as a matter of fact in saying I need to make a different decision here. I'm feeling very tired. I'm wanting to listen, but I noticed that I need some support myself. I'm going to look for a solution.
So
But
what we're really trying to do here is we have the intention of maintaining kind of like a container of empathy, a state of empathy, and we're looking at how do we keep that state going.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't necessarily need to rely on me, although obviously if somebody has lost trust in human beings and I'm creating this bond, it is very important that there's not that many people that you have that bond with. I mean, establishing trust goes slowly. And so I am the main anchor in that moment. And so I may need to hold that energy for a while. And I may need to be aware of the fact that I will need more support than usual. And so taking care of me, self-empathy, it means that I will also, not only in the conversation, stay present to myself, being aware of where my needs are, but also outside of that conversation, make sure that I'm getting the extra support that I need. It's a very unusual situation. Now, the fifth point is refraining from any form of sympathy. And sympathy really means like I'm affected by what the other person is telling me. My own feelings are coming up. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it shifts the focus from that person to me. And when the focus shifts, I'm no longer able to fully listen. I'm not able to be fully present. And actually, because of these unpleasant feelings that I now experience, I may want to solve something. I want to change something. And so what comes out of my mouth may be like either reassurance or advice or help that the other person didn't ask for. And so I really want to refrain from that because it's a block to empathy, and I need to know where I am. If I'm connected to my own feelings, that's okay. But I want to keep that empathic connection with the other person. Now, refraining from any judgment. Any judgment that I hold in my mind, if I see somebody and I think they did something stupid, it will show in my face, it will show in my tone, even though I may not speak the judgment itself. It will come out in my body posture, my tone, the way my eyes look at them when I speak, or just the word that I use, the sentence that I choose. And so I really want to be aware of that, because if it leaks out anyhow, it is no empathy. And so I've heard Marshall Rosenberg actually say in situations that were intense that he said, okay, time out. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm aware that I'm having some strong judgments here. I don't want them to affect this conversation negatively. I will deal with my own judgments outside of this conversation, and I will return when I've solved this, because there's always something better behind that judgment. But in the conversation, I don't have the time maybe to find that out. I need self-time. The seventh point would be refraining from offering help or a solution. It's not saying that there is no help or solution needed, but we wait till the other person has fully expressed themselves. So, and we also may wonder and inquire if there's a need for help. Sometimes just by speaking, people come to their own conclusions. It's just like they need to hear their own story to be able to sort of draw the necessary conclusions from that. It's only after I'm invited to share my views on it, what might help in the situation, that I would do that. But if I do it before that time, it's not empathy, and actually interrupts the connection. So these are the points that Marshall Rosenberg describes, and yeah, it's a lot to remember, and so whenever we still need to remember that we're still practicing learning empathy. But what I find is that all these things, when what Baron-Cohen said is like the spontaneous connection, it just doesn't seem to be there. But it's not there because of all the work that I did before that. Because I have become aware of what that results in and how that affects the conversation. And so there's a lot of personal work that goes into understanding empathy. There's a lot of self-empathy that I need before I can actually give empathy to others. It's not that I cannot give empathy to others, but I find that if I don't understand myself, it's pretty hard to understand other people. And so often I need to empathize with myself before I connect with other people.
Yeah, so it's that awareness of what's going on inside yourself. And one thing I found that's good for that is it's important that we all have people who empathize with us. It kind of helps with that self-empathy, to have time where you can kind of share, and it kind of almost like fills our empathy batteries. I know you do restorative circles, and before the facilitator goes into a restorative circle, they are heard and empathized with someone else.
Yes.
Right. So that they kind of can ground themselves, and so maybe we need a whole chain of ongoing empathy, and it kind of deepens and grounds us, and maybe helps wire our brain more to be empathic and trust empathy. And
well, maybe we need to look at how we've set up society. We've built huge cities, huge colonies in which we live, and that doesn't tend to be the place where empathy seems to happen a lot. And smaller communities where people actually know each other seem to be more fruitful as an environment in which I just have a conversation. I even don't need to call it empathy. I just have conversations about my day, how things are going. As a normal thing, I get to express what life is like for me in that moment. I think that relieves a lot of pressure. And I remember when I was practicing law, I would come home after work and my wife would ask me, "How was your day?" Mm-hmm. So dutifully, I just go hour by hour, express what happened in the day, and then we've said it. But that's not empathy. And that's not empathizing with myself either. I didn't even know how to put that in feelings and needs, or what needs were not met, and so it seemed more like a summing up of events, laced with judgments about it, and without being able to actually process it in a way that would make me feel better. And I think, to have somebody who listens to you, and maybe just by validating the feelings and needs that are going on for me, may just give me the clarity and help me to process the experience. And I find I need that on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems for me it builds what I've heard the term resilience. That I've heard that term within child development, that when children are heard and seen and kind of felt, they see themselves reflected, that it kind of creates a sense of grounding. And the more we have that, the more grounded we are, and the more spacious we become. So I kind of almost see it like an empathy battery, right? We got to charge that battery and fill it up. And I've seen people who are very much on the edge, right? And their battery's really low, and it takes the smallest thing to kind of set them into a conflict.
Yeah. To me, similarly, Stephen Covey talks about bank accounts of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And how much trust do you have in the relationship? And every time that there's a judgment, actually, you're depleting the account. And every time that you're feeling validated, your account has increased with that much. And so empathic connection actually creates that. Like it is an increasing balance that you have in your account with each other. And next time that you meet, you look at each other positively, but not only at each other, because you have these experiences, you will also look better at other people differently, positively. You'll see other people in a different light. And that's all because your battery is being filled.
Yeah, I like those metaphors. The battery being filled, the bank account being full, the resilience. It's a nice way to, I enjoy just kind of creating images like that. But I also did want to make sure we covered the full article. You went into another phase there. You mentioned those 7 points, and then you'd mentioned Richard Salem, and then why empathy, and had mentioned, a couple other, Karen Willis. And so I wonder if you want to kind of finish off the article.
Yes, well, I mean, people can read the article on my website. So that's cvcn.nl. So that mean they can go for details there. What's important in the article is basically the conclusion. When I gave this talk for the police, what was important for them is to get a sense of how they could still do their job, and that empathy would actually help them to do their jobs more efficiently. Empathy is not something burdensome, a people skill that you need to relate. It's not about being nice. It's about understanding, actually, that somebody who's been attacked is in a situation of overwhelm, and that when you empathize with this person and you become a trusted companion, as it were, it restores this feeling of trust and balance faster than that you would interrogate people. Interrogation would mean that you become the new offender in a situation where they need trust. So it creates a disconnect. So empathy actually makes sense if you're a policeman and you're looking for evidence to get somebody to trust you authentically, and to express, being able to express to you what really happened, gives you the clearest evidence. If like I'm emotionally overwhelmed, I'm thinking that whatever I'm going to say is probably not necessarily the facts. I'm saying this out of my emotion, out of my perspective through this emotion. But when it comes to facts, and our justice system thrives on facts, well, how are you going to find out what the facts are? And it helps if I can talk to somebody who's been able to restore that balance and then tell me about what happened and the details it happened in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not only better for police, it's also better for the person that was in that situation. They need time to restore themselves. And actually, what I found, it was interesting, here in Canada, in Edmonton. In Edmonton, there's the Zebra Center. And the Zebra Center actually deals with kids that have been sexually assaulted. And they saw this, and so they created this cooperation between police, crown prosecutors, medical services, victims assistance, and so children are really helped through this process. And so there is a place where we already apply this, and I find this very hopeful.
How was your article and talk received after you gave it?
I think that there was a lot of information during that conference, and what I saw, and this is an important thing, like it seems that to me that it was actually more important there to talk about policemen needing empathy.
Mm.
And that before they were able to do this for the victims or survivors, actually they were working in a highly pressured organization in a society where they were dealing with violence on a daily basis, and they seemed to burn out. And so they need a lot of empathy themselves and are not getting it. They don't get a lot of validation. They're supposed to do their jobs. You see? And so there is a part of, this self-empathy or empathy in a job that's hard to do is of the utmost importance. So I think if we need to start, maybe we need to start looking at supporting people, validating the people that are doing this valuable work, so that they in return are in the position that she actually can empathize with other people.
So an article on how to empathically support police might have been something to have presented or to create.
Yes, and so there is a huge need. The other side is that there is a certain atmosphere in the police organizations. It has typically it's like a culture, you could say, and in that culture, the focus is not necessarily on how you emotionally connect, but about how you appear, I would say. And so what should a policeman be like? And that appearance may negatively impact empathic connection. And so, although main policemen are people too, they are not necessarily getting what they need to function as human beings in an organization that is being shaped in the way it is. Yeah. So it's difficult, and like I think there's a lot of work to do, as much as in the police force, as much as in the military, and I've trained in hospitals, and hospitals, I mean, any organization that is very hierarchical seems to have disconnect between the layers, and it's harder to empathize if somebody is the boss and you're supposed to be submissive.
So it's we have the whole society kind of a chain of connections. So we've got with the violence, we've got the police coming. The police are within another political framework. The political framework is in a cultural framework, and so they're all kind of connected. And it's kind of like, where does this empath? It's almost like there's a need for the empathic listening to start somewhere, because everybody's too stressed. So where do you see your work going forward now?
Well, I would love to focus mainly on education. I think where we can really make a difference is in schools, in creating schools that connect differently with each other, where a teacher is not hierarchically better or more than a pupil. It's just a different function. And this is where we start to create a different model. The model that we have, our society, has been created over centuries. So I'm not thinking that we're going to change that overnight. Every revolution that has tried to change everything seemed to come up with something similar afterwards anyhow. So I would suggest we go to education and start to teach children differently. Make a different connection there, and then we get adults that behave differently, connect differently, and then we create a different world.
Well, with that, we've gone a bit over an hour, so we can perhaps bring this conversation together, and really appreciate your time. And I really enjoyed that article because you laid everything out so nicely. So I kind of like that when it's so well crafted and articulated. So want to thank you, for going through that. And, I hope we can keep, in contact and maybe find some ways of, collaborating or what have you.
Yes, sure. And I'm really happy with this interview, Edwin. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you for inviting me.
Me too. Thank you. So, okay, we'll see you later then.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.